All right, so in the last section, we spoke about how we're going to communicate information from the search input to the app. So the first step is to refactor our app into a class-based component. We've already learned refactoring a functional component. Remember, we refactored a functional component over to class-based component. So I'm going to just take all this and I will replace it with class app extends react.component. Then inside there, I'm going to define render function, and I'm going to put a curly brace on the other side of it, like so. Cool. So now we can define a callback function on the app. I'm going to give it a name of onSearchSubmit. I'm going to say that this thing gets called with our search entry. So now we can define our constructor function inside of our class. Let's just go ahead and define it. So inside the constructor, to do that, I'm going to say this dot onSearchSubmit equals this dot onSearchSubmit and bind this. All right, so right now, let's just console log that entry and make sure it shows up inside the app. Okay, so now we can take this method and pass it down into the search input as a props. So I'll say to my props onSearchSubmit and pass it to our onSearchSubmit method. Give the same name to my props and this callback method right here. And I'll call this callback with the same props name inside of my search input component. Right? Okay. So I want to run this function each time that the search input component gets submitted. You follow? So onSubmit is the event handler that's going to run this function. Then inside onFormSubmit, rather than console log out our entry, we instead want to call onSearchSubmit, which was passed in as props to this component. Now, remember, anytime that we pass a props down to a component that we're creating, we refer to that props with the this name. So inside of this search input, to reference the props, we would say this.props.onSearchSubmit. Cool. So now one little issue here throughout this course, we have made use of props always in a functional component. This is the first time that we're making use of props inside of a class-based component. You dig? So one little difference between the two is that when we are in a class-based component, we reference the props object with this.props. Yeah, that's it. That's the only difference. So to get access to the callback that was passed from the app down to our search input, we would reference this.props.onSearchSubmit. Then I call that, and when I call it, I'll pass in this state entry as an argument, like so. That's it. So now we're saying that whenever a user submits the form, we are going to run onFormSubmit here. We take the event and prevent the default behavior that would cause the page to refresh itself, and then we look at our props subject, and we call the function that was passed into this thing as the onSearchSubmit. And then we invoke that function with this .state entry. So this is the function that ultimately is going to be invoked. And for right now, we're just going to console log out some value. All right, cool. So let's test it out. I'll just put in some text right here, hit enter. And what do you know? We see some entry right there. Now, of course, you'll notice that it was console from the app file. So let's pause right here.